Spectres, welcome back to the Mass Effect Lorecast. This is your host, Tom. I'm here with Sam as usual, and we're doing this a little bit earlier this week. We're kind of mixing some stuff up, and we've got a different kind of episode. We're not following a character through different parts of their story. Today, we're talking about some very specific things that it seems like we probably should have discussed at this point, but we just haven't yet. Sam, what are we talking about today?
Yes, we're talking about a metallic character, a certain armored character who is just with us through thick and thin in Mass Effect 1. Sadly, not visible or anywhere on our ship in Mass Effect 2 and 3. That is the Mako. Mm-hmm. But I bet a lot of people don't know what came before the Mako. So we're going to talk about the vehicle that the Alliance used before the Mako as well.
Awesome.
That's called the M29 Grizzly.
Yeah, so we're talking vehicles today, and I remember when Mass Effect 1 came out, one of the most controversial things was, oh my god, driving that stupid car thing around is so janky. Do you remember this? Remember people being kind of like, I love this game. I really like the characters. I really like their RPG stuff. Space stuff is awesome. Why the heck do I have to drive this car around? And oh my God, how do I keep getting it stuck on rocks or whatever?
There is a team of Mako haters, and I don't talk to those people. No, I'm just kidding. I love the Mako. I love the Mako. I always have. I'm unapologetic about it. It was a little funky, to operate in the first game, especially with such a huge amount of jagged mountain edges that you kind of had to Skyrim mountain goat up before Skyrim came out.
Skyrim horse up the sides of things.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's beloved by the community, I think, more than its successor, the Hammerhead, which we're not going to talk about today. But it was good, and it was primarily used, at least in the game, for exploring these uncharted worlds, because we weren't allowed to drive around like settled areas, really.
Right.
I mean, we could with Novaria and some parts of Pharos and Vermeer as well, but it was like primarily used for exploring uncharted worlds, similar to what a lot of fans want in Starfield, which is ironic because I'm hearing that complaint of, there needs to be a Land Rover in Starfield. Well, Mass Effect 1 had one, and it wasn't loved by everyone. But why don't we talk about the appearance of it, right? It kind of looks like if you were to take a sports car and elongate it, like just pull it at both ends and then just stretch it out so that it's got like 8 wheels. It's got 8 wheels, right? Or is it 6?
6.
I can't remember.
So there's
6 wheels.
1 in the front and then 2 further to the back.
Yes, but there's 6, a gap where it looks like there should be another front half wheel, right? But it's 6.
Yeah.
And it's armored, that much is clear, but it also has a massive gun on the top.
It's kind of like a really sleek looking tank.
Yes.
Without treads, but multiple big wheels.
And it kind of looks like its namesake, right? The Mako. It kind of looks sharky.
Yeah, so here, I wanted to do this because I looked up Mako, and I thought this would be, in fact, initially the goof was going to be, here, I've got some details from the wiki, and I was going to pull up the Mako fish, like shark wiki, and then read that instead. But I'm not going to, that's a dumb joke. But
this is not Shark Week.
But this is actually interesting. I'm like, okay, Mako, a Mako shark. A lot of people recognize that that's the inspiration for the name, which makes sense. And we get the same kind of thing with like, I don't know, the names of certain types of vehicles or stuff in our world where they're named after cool animals or something like that, right? But this is interesting. The word Mako comes from the Maori language. I don't know if most people know this, either meaning the shark or a shark tooth. And there are all these derivations depending on which Polynesian language you came from. Mako from Kai Tahu, which is a Maori dialect. Mango in other Maori dialects. Mago in Samoan. Ma'o in Tahitian. Mano in Hawaiian. So this name is has all these derivations through all these different cultures, which I love digging into real world stuff. But
none of them refer to a tank.
And none of them refer to a tank. In fact, it's a small finned shark, but the sleekness of the design looks kind of like it's kind of elongated. It's kind of sleek, kind of the way a shark body looks. So the name kind of tracks for that.
especially at the nose of the vehicle, which comes to kind of a point. And like I mentioned, it has a huge gun on the top. It's a 155 millimeter mass accelerator cannon. And if you remember from our previous discussions about guns, a lot of those guns, the way that they project these projectiles is by altering the mass of the slug and then propelling it at extremely high speeds. And that is what this mass accelerator cannon does. It's 155 millimeters, so this thing packs quite a wallop, which if you've used it in Mass Effect 1, you probably know. But there's also a lot of people in Mass Effect community who never knew that the Mako has a cannon. They knew it has a machine gun because that's the right trigger button on controller. Mm-hmm. But the right bumper button on controller is what the cannon does. Right. So it has this coaxial mounted machine gun. We don't know too much about that. It's probably just a typical machine gun. But the mass accelerator cannon, if you haven't used it, it destroys enemies. And it is meant as what we call in our real world an infantry fighting vehicle, an IFV, or what are the other names for those? MTB. There's a number of different acronyms that the real world militaries use, but in Mass Effect they also use the phrase infantry fighting vehicle. So meant to deploy alongside troops on the ground.
So I would assume that the projectile the cannon fires would be a high explosive type of round. We're not looking to armor pierce other vehicles. We're looking to take on infantry, which means creating explosions that can hit people on the ground, creating, dangerous situations rather than trying to hit a very specific point, rather making a big explosion, which hits multiple people or blows something up.
Yeah, I think that just given the use of it in Mass Effect 1, it does kind of feel like it's a high explosive round, but I'm willing to bet that it's not too far off the lore, that if you wanted to, you could probably customize the rounds for whatever you needed to do. Mm-hmm. And because the basic technology is already there about altering the mass and propelling it at very high speeds. However, it's also its chassis is very unique in that it has been completely what is that word? Hermetically sealed. It's like completely sealed to the environments so that you can use it really on any planet because it was designed to be used in a variety of planetary scenarios. And it's powered not by any kind of rare fuel. It's hydrogen oxygen fuel cell. That's what it's powered by. So it can really operate most places. And that's kind of the design of it, not just to fight other things, but to be a support unit for infantry units so that they can get to and from A and B.
Yeah. So this is the inspiration here, the big wheels being able to being sealed, being able to take over wherever you want on whatever environment. It reminds me of like a moon rover on steroids, right?
Yes.
You don't need to wear your spacesuit because now you're in a hermetically sealed thing. So that's different. But the big wheels able to handle different amounts of gravity and also having gigantic weapons on it that, can be used for whatever situation they need it for.
This is a rugged vehicle, and the wheels reflect that. I don't know how wide the wheels are, but this is definitely meant for, all terrain. I can just hear Sam Elliott narrating the commercial for the Mako, can't you? Like, rugged, determined. You want to drive a Mako because you care where you're going.
Eat up your enemies like a shark. Drive a Mako.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of the appearance of the Mako, but I do want to talk a little bit more about the technology, right? Because the technology behind it is pretty cool. And I think a lot of players probably didn't know that it's more than just the tank you get to use.
Yeah. So how does the tech work? Like, what is that?
So we know this. So here's a little bit from an old BioWare forum post that I found that's official. It is canon, and it says it has an ESO core that can be used to reduce mass, allowing it to be safely airdropped. When you're landing on all those uncharted worlds.
Okay.
You're probably wondering, how the hell are they dropping this thing basically from orbit?
Right. Yeah. Okay. That totally makes sense because I always thought that was a little bit like cartoony. Like, this thing. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, why are these guys not just painting the ground red as soon as they land?
Right.
I don't know.
Right. Those wheels are
Well, this is
not
why.
that springy. Come on. Like,
Talk about shock absorption. Yeah, no, this is why, because it's used to reduce math.
I love when I can reduce math.
I reduce math every day. I just don't do it. No, but it's used to reduce mass, this ESO core, and it allows ships like the Normandy, which, by the way, this isn't only used on the Normandy. It allows ships like the Normandy to basically rapidly deploy their shore parties, and it also limits the ship's exposure to defensive anti-aircraft artillery. So that's pretty cool. That makes complete sense, because if you're trying to drop someone in a pretty hot zone, then you can't be exposed to the AA guns for too long.
Yeah, so it's such a weird thing. It's so hard to imagine how this actually works. And, like, it's reducing the mass, which means that the gravity is going to pull on it less. Does it just fall really slowly then? Like technically, from a real world perspective, it wouldn't fall at the same rate and just have less of an impact. It would it would accelerate slower until it hits full acceleration, but then still impact the ground at full acceleration. So
yeah,
does that actually work? We need to get a physicist on the show.
It also has thrusters, the force of which we don't know how heavy those thrusters are pushing, right?
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Yeah, there are some other elements there. It's hard to imagine that happening in the real world, but I guess once you have the technology, you dial it in and it just works or whatever.
Here's the weird part that we know about the thrusters. When you're in Mass Effect 1, you're in an uncharted world and you've explored everything you want to explore. You're like, all right, time to go back to the Normandy. Well, the way you do that is you go to the map and then you hit like the X button and it takes you back to the Normandy. But there's no animation for that. Mm-hmm. So you never get to see how exactly that happens. Well, the lore says the thrusters that the Mako has, those little jump jets, that's what propels it high enough to be picked up by the Normandy.
So it must reduce its mass again, and then those thrusters can just like shoot it up in the air.
Unless I'm misinterpreting some bits in the lore here, yes, that is the implication.
So, what'd be really cool is if you could do that at a whim while exploring the planet. Like you're like, oh crap, there's a big old canyon over there. All right, reduce the mass, and just like boost over the canyon.
Yeah, that would be super cool, but the result that we end up getting is just like a wimpy little
just
like a little jump.
Okay, there we go. Yeah,
basically I think that the thrusters were added from a gameplay perspective to make sure you never got stuck.
Oh yeah,
that was basically it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
So, and that's not the only cool part of the technology to me. The Mako's hull is covered with laser detection arrays. This is according to the same official BioWare post. Mm-hmm. And these laser detection arrays forewarn the crew of enemy laser-guided ordnance. So if there's laser-guided missiles that are coming in toward the Mako, you would have little alerts pop up like, missile lock-on detected.
Is there... So first of all, awesome. Secondly, are there countermeasures? Because what's the use of a warning if you just still get blown up anyway? Like, you just drive away faster?
Maybe the thrusters are supposed to like put you so fast, like out of harm's way that the missile can't track it.
Right.
I don't know. All I know is that the rockets that are fired at you in Mass Effect 1 are very easily dodgeable.
Yeah, but you would like again go into like real world situations. Like we're thinking like jet fighters or something, right? And you've got a missile tracking the jet. And it's going to hit the jet. There's really nothing you can do as a pilot to maneuver better than that missile, right? And that's why they have countermeasures. They drop chaff or flares. They drop something in the air that hits the missile before it hits the jet, so it ignites in the air, or a flare goes off, and now the missile is confused and follows the flare instead of the jet itself. But we don't really have that with the Mako. So...
Certainly not in gameplay, but again, this is one of those scenarios where I feel like it wouldn't be too far of a jump in the lore to say that, infantry units are deployed with specialized, countermeasures.
Yeah. I would imagine you would need something like that. So like, boop, 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 incoming missile, and then somebody's able to respond. Because obviously the big cannon's not shooting it out of the air, right? Like, that's not what's happening.
No, but can you imagine the physics interaction of like the Mako in zero gravity, and then it fires the cannon, and then it does a backflip, and it just circles over and over and over again because of the force.
Oh my God, that's a good question. So if you reduce the mass and it fires the can you still fire the cannon? Because it would push the thing around because there'd be less mass, right?
Right.
Like
right.
like tanks in our own world, in order to have larger and larger cannons, have to have more mass in the tank so that it doesn't flip the tank over or push it way backwards when it fires, right? There was a balance between this through the development of like World War I to World War II to modern tanks.
Yes.
Wow.
This doesn't even consider the fact that in reality, a lot of these uncharted worlds are going to have differing levels of gravity. Right?
Right. Yeah.
That wasn't a gameplay mechanic in Mass Effect 1.
Right.
So
if you're on the moon
about that,
and it's like a third the gravity or whatever, then like, yeah, you shoot a big old cannon. But then again, the projectile mass is reduced as well, which means it probably doesn't need as much force to get out of the cannon, which means that the vehicle itself doesn't have to be as heavy in order to keep itself from being blown around or flipped over or whatever.
I mean, we're trying to poke holes in the lore here, and somehow the lore writers have just thought of all of these arguments ahead of time. They're playing 9D chess.
Right. Well, it's part of why we can do this is that this component of the game was so limited. It was kind of just this added on little thing that allowed you to get it around in an environment, give you a few extra little things to do, or you have to fight some enemies or whatever, right? It's not the bulk of the game, and the game is not built around simulating like tank warfare in space, right? Like that's not what the game was designed to do, but it has lore attached to it, and so we have to kind of extrapolate, like if we were given a more realistic view of this, what would it be like? And I mean, it seems like it kind of tracks for the most part, right?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I think that you can make defenses about it like you just did with the altering the mass of the projectile. What if they just altered it down to the mass of like a paperclip? You know what I mean? And then you could probably, maybe the operator has control over that.
It just becomes like a blow dart. It's just like a...
But it's propelled at very high speeds.
Right.
So, you know, who knows? I also want to focus on the fact that this has technology, this Mako has technology that we currently have in our arsenal in the United States military right now. It has ground penetrating radar. That allows for detection of anti-vehicle mines and other anomalies below the surface of whatever planet you're on. So that's pretty cool. That is something that real world military vehicles have. Not just military vehicles, there's a ton of civilian applications too. Ground penetrating radar is in a lot of urban search and rescue equipment now, because if you're going to an area where there's, say, been an earthquake and a lot of rubble has dropped on top and they're trying to find survivors, or even just the remains of people who have been trapped in there, then they will use ground penetrating radar to go through that rubble, that cement, and try and detect heartbeats and things like that, so that they know where to pinpoint the search, and that can help them find people. So it's cool that the Mako uses some technology that might sound futuristic when you're reading it, but it's actually in use today.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And it makes sense that would be extrapolated out, because it reduces the effectiveness of mines or other kinds of things enemies could put in front of a vehicle that has to ride on the ground. So yeah, that's a cool addition.
Another note, the Mako looks pretty cramped, right? It's very condensed, but it can actually hold 8 people. Believe it or not, you can fit 8 people in there.
Wow. Yeah, I'm looking at it again. Like, I'm remembering seeing like your body next to it, and it does feel like you're cramped. Like, I don't know that 8 people could stand up in it, but no, you can definitely like sit down and maybe face each other across the body of it.
Have very intimate conversations, I guess.
Right. Everybody cuddle up. We're going on a mission.
It's funny because like some of the characters, I don't know if it's a fever dream or what. I could have sworn some of the characters remark how cramped it is in there. And yet Shepard is only going on deployments with crews of 3 total.
Right. Yeah.
So it can fit 8. Apparently it can fit 2 in the front and 6 people in the passenger hold, possibly with room for 2 more.
Weird. All right. We got it. We're full. Somebody to lay down across our laps. Okay, good. We made it.
Probably doesn't apply if you have a Krogan in your squad. I'm just saying.
Yeah, well, I guess that's true. Like, I would assume that this is like human-shaped people, right? Like,
yeah, 8 humanoids, sized, 8 human-sized beings, I guess. Definitely not Krogan. Maybe not 8 Turians. I doubt it.
Yeah. So yeah. 8 humans, 4 Krogan.
Yes. So you can cram 8 people into this very agile tank whose mass can be reduced on a whim so that it can be dropped from orbit. And once it's down on the surface, it can survive extreme heat and cold. And we know this because there's different planetary hazards in Mass Effect 1, but they always become irrelevant the second that you go back in the Mako.
Right.
So, it can survive any kind of airborne agent, I guess, too, which is very cool. But I also wonder, with the constant change in mass of the entire thing, I wonder if that feels weird for the people inside.
Well, I guess that's the other question is, does it change also the mass of the individuals in it? And like,
I would guess so.
That a thing? Can you change the mass of a human without having any dire consequences? I would imagine that your biology doesn't work exactly the same way if your mass is different, right? Like,
maybe you'd feel very light. I could swear that one of the characters in Mass Effect, I can't remember who, talks about the feeling of when, like the stomach drop feeling of when certain technology on the Normandy kicks in. Yeah. And maybe that's what they're referencing. I can't remember the exact line right now, but
yeah, I mean, it makes sense because they reduce the mass of the spaceships in order to travel, right? Like, individual people's mass has to be altered in that situation, so why not alter in this situation? But I'd never really considered that before. Like, if your mass is less, if all of the mass of all of the cells in your body is less, but your body is the same size and it's still functioning the same way, then does your blood pressure increase because your heart is still pumping blood at the same rate, but now the blood weighs less? So does it
just for clarity for our listeners, we're not discussing the differences in what different levels of gravity would feel like. That would adjust our weight, but we're talking about adjusting our mass, which is different.
Yes, which is like very different. For example, if you were to pick up 2 dumbbells that are exactly the same size, and one is made out of iron and it weighs 20 pounds, that's a very dense material, right? And if you pick up another one that's made out of plastic and weighs 20 pounds, well, that plastic one's going to be bigger because it takes more plastic to weigh the same amount, but plastic is less dense, right? So like the mass of our bodies would be reduced, meaning that it's like our density would reduce without changing the size. Which
and
is
then we'd
super
suddenly
weird.
become more dense.
Maybe this whole conversation is just dense. Oh man.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, exactly. Somewhere someone is listening to this shit like, come on, man. Dude. Move on from the mass.
Yeah, we need to get a physicist on the show to tell us what would happen to our bodies if you reduced our mass, because I'm pretty sure that the blood would just like blow through your veins extremely quickly. And that would be a problem, along with maybe a number of other things in your body that just would not work the same way.
We're being real massholes about this topic. But so the GPR, the ground penetrating radar that I brought up, these are brought to the attention of the crew by the vehicle's microframe computer system. So apparently there's some advanced electronics on this piece of technology as well. And we know from gameplay that the Mako also has shields. So it must have some kind of kinetic shield generator, meaning that it is possible to overload the shields. And as we remember from the technology on how shields work in Mass Effect, it blocks fast incoming projectiles, right? It deflects them.
I remember that.
But the slow ones, the slow ones, it does not. So I'd wonder if the Mako would have particular issue fighting off local like fauna who are trying to like destroy the Mako with their choppers or something, because those aren't going to be too fast.
Yeah. Or a low-tech species on a planet throwing a bunch of rocks with slings.
Trebuchets.
Trebuchets.
Yeah, why not?
Really crappy bows and arrows. It's just like, oh, you're scratching up the paint. Stop it.
Or maybe it would be highly effective. I don't know. So it has a number of strengths, right? I think the strengths are that it's small. It can be technically smaller, I guess, depending on the need. But in terms of how you can fit it in a ship, and it's very mobile, very deployable. It can operate in any atmosphere. It gives infantry units a new degree of mobility. Those are a few of the strengths. The 155 millimeter mass accelerator cannon, nothing to frown at as well. So it's like having a very fast mobile tank that can operate anywhere with little maintenance. Some of the drawbacks, though, I don't think that it would be comfortable for long deployments.
No, especially in a cramped situation. It seems like having the extra room for extra people is more about mobilizing troops quickly and then letting them get back out and then leaving the driver and the two drivers or whoever is managing the vehicle in there with more room for themselves now that everybody else is back out of the vehicle again. So,
right.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not suitable for long deployments, but that is a departure from the predecessor of the Mako, which was a little bit better at that. And we can talk about that after the mid-break.
Yeah, we're talking about the other vehicle when we get back from the mid-break. But don't go anywhere. We got to thank our patrons, and we will be right back.
Message coming in. Patching it through.
I am sovereign, and this
Lorecast
is mine. I like the sound of that.
All right, here we are in the middle of the show. Thank you to our patrons who support this show, and big shout outs to our newest patrons, Ryan S. and Architect Art. Thank you for being here and supporting us. And shout outs to all 67 of our current patrons, including our Shepherd tier patrons, Kokashins, Edboy, Kira C, Lieutenant Cicino, and William. Thank you for all of your support. If you are interested in joining us on the Patreon, helping support the show, getting ad-free episodes and t-shirts or stickers, a bunch of other stuff, and maybe even joining us for our patron chats, then head over to patreon.com/Mass Effect Lorecast. Speaking of our patron chat, we've got another patron episode coming up very soon because it's getting close to the end of the month on the 29th, Friday the 29th at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. So that's, depending on when you're listening to this, it's a week away. So you got time to sign up if you'd like to join us as a tier 4 patron or higher, and we'll get together and chat about stuff. So go check that out. Also, if you leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, we'll read out your review like this one. This is from Beatrice the Bear in the United States, who writes, "This is my favorite podcast on the Citadel. I'm a huge Mass Effect nerd and I know a lot of the lore. This is a great podcast to dive deeper with great explanations." So thank you, Beatrice. And thanks to everybody who helps support the show. Also, if you want to rate the show on Spotify, give us a 5-star rating on there. That's a huge help. You can also comment on individual episodes. You can share it with your friends. All of that stuff helps keep the show going, and we really do appreciate it. All right, let's move on with this other vehicle. Here we go.
Spit it out, or are you trying to build suspense?
You're so dense, sir. Obviously, I do not know as much about human relationships as I thought.
Sam, I know that first vehicle we talked about was called the Mako, and this vehicle has another name based off of an animal.
And that's true. It's called the Grizzly.
This is the bear. This is the bear.
Grizzly sounds a lot more badass, doesn't it? Grizzly.
Or cute.
Let's go get in the Grizzly.
Let's get in the grizzly bear. There's a little cuddly grizzly bear.
Don't try and cuddle grizzly bears, by the way. I don't think it'll end well. This is another infantry fighting vehicle. It's called the M29 Grizzly, whereas the Mako was the M35 Mako. So this is one generation before the Mako. You could call it the Proto Mako if you want. And it was considered the standard battle taxi of Systems Alliance Marines for almost 3 decades. So this was like a long stay in Alliance arsenals, right? And then just as we begin our Mass Effect journey, this M35 Mako is kind of making the rounds as the new hot thing. So the Grizzly, I want to say that, okay, so every player who's played Mass Effect 1 and some who have played later games because it can be seen in the background, you've seen the Grizzly. You have seen it. It's in the background mostly. You don't get to drive one, but it's got 6 wheels as well, but they're kind of on tracks. You know what I mean? They're very fixed.
This is one of the most Star Wars looking things I've seen in Mass Effect, because the front has that like triangular frame that looks kind of like an A-wing attached to just this wheeled platform with a turret gun on it.
It's a huge turret too.
Yeah, it's very Star Warsy for some reason. This really triggers the Star Warsy thing, and it's the kind of thing that you see, like, I don't know, you pass by these. They're like, there's like wrecked ones in certain locations, just kind of in parts of the map, but you never really sit and look at it because it's like, oh, that's just some of the map geometry to show me that there was like a battle here and stuff got blown up or something.
Yes, exactly. And it's bigger. It's bigger than the Mako by a considerable margin. It's like several meters longer. But when you take off the antenna and the turret, which are pretty much the only two protrusions on the top, they're basically the same height. And so with it being bigger than the Mako, you can see why the development of the Mako was so crucial, because the Mako could fit in ships' cargo bays like smaller ships like frigates, which increased mobilization capability for the Alliance military like none other.
To also point out, the wheels on the Mako are below the main body of the vehicle, whereas this one, the wheels are kind of parallel with the body. So I would imagine that the Mako actually does a better job getting over rough terrain and that sort of thing as well.
I would venture to guess as well, you know, Grizzly just looks like heavier and bulkier and more fixed, less agile. I also don't see too much room for passengers in there.
Yeah, I don't know where you fit them unless that body is more like big and voluminous on the inside than we would imagine. Also,
the voluptuous.
Also, the Mako kind of looks like a shark. This one does not look like a bear at all.
No, no. This name was definitely created after the art of the Mako was. This was definitely a later thought lore explanation. So it's longer. It's a little taller, I guess, if you factor in the turret and the antenna. The lore says that 6 people can fit inside. I can't see how. Because you've got that front part like we were talking about, which looks like I guess you could call it the cockpit, or the front cabin of the Grizzly. But then there's like kind of like the second part back toward the turret, where I suppose someone would have to sit unless they're operating the turret from the front. And then, of course, you have the propulsion in the back, which is powered by power cells aboard the vehicle that are providing propulsion to the wheels. But I don't see any thruster jets to get it out of sticky situations.
Yeah, I don't see that either. Also, I have some new headcanon. I think I figured it out. Both of these models can fit more people because they are originally designed for Volus.
There we go. That's it. They were designed for Volus originally, and sadly, human beings took command.
Yeah, they just took it from those poor Volus. They're like, give us those vehicles. We're going to use them now. And they're like, they just never changed the little, description on the vehicle when you buy it new. And the little window sticker talks about like mileage and how much the gun can shoot or whatever. And then it's like occupancy. But they never updated that part. It's all just Volus.
You know what's kind of funny is this thing is so slim to the ground for how heavy it is that they needed to come up with like interesting ways to repair the vehicle and maintenance on the vehicle. So you actually need like a trench in the ground to get over or to get under it. So you need to park over top of like a trench or something under the ground.
Like some of the car shops you go to where they like change your oil, like will drive you over a trench and people can go basically down underneath the vehicle without having to lift the vehicle up. So
yes.
That sort of thing.
And we actually see this on Noveria in the garage. When you fight all those Geth before you go out into the snowstorm, there is a Grizzly there. So it is kind of interesting as a vehicle, but I can understand why it was phased out, because in terms of technology, the Mako just seems better. I don't know too much about this turret that was on the that was on the Grizzly, but it looks bigger, but it kind of looks like the Mako turret is more advanced. We do know that the Grizzlies, because they were around so long and eventually there was a civilian desire to have a Grizzly, so they stripped it of the turret, they stripped it of the antenna and the military equipment, and then they were called VT-7s.
Wait, so this is like the Humvee/Hummer of Mass Effect?
Essentially, yeah, I guess you could call it that. Yeah, they took the turret off, they took the antenna off, and then they painted it brown with orange highlights. So that is the Mass Effect civilian Humvee.
That's amazing. So yeah, no offense to anybody who's ever had a Humvee, but there's definitely a perception of the kind of person who drives a Humvee or Hummer, like in their personal life, right?
Do you think that the civilians who were driving these Grizzlies were also viewed as overbearing assholes?
Yeah. Just kind of, big jock types who like absolutely need to show everybody on the road how big and awesome they are. Yeah.
Maybe not, because they were also often found in mining colonies, if I remember right, and they were found on different uncharted worlds where I suppose you would kind of need one if you were there for the long haul and you needed some big bulky thing to get you around. I think it's a utilitarian purpose mostly. I think that's why a lot of civilian versions were doled out. But there were also corporations that were, using M29 Grizzlies. If I remember right, there's a number of Grizzlies on Pharos that have been, crashed and destroyed, and they're just kind of static objects. And I actually have this art book, The Art of Mass Effect, and they mention about the Grizzly that this was the original design for the Mako. That it was supposed to look like this.
Wow.
But then the gameplay didn't really lend credence to it, so they changed it around a little bit. And they liked the look of it, so that's why it's kind of a static decoration in the games. Mm-hmm. And if I remember right, in the original Mass Effect 1, there was only one instance where you could kind of use it. You were allowed to use the turret to clear the garage on Noveria of Geth.
Okay,
but I don't remember this being a part of the Legendary Edition when I've played through more recently. So maybe they took that out. I'm not sure.
Huh. Yeah. Well, it makes sense. I mean, from a lore perspective, to have like an older version of a similar vehicle that you see in like locations, older battlefields, things like that. And as much as I'm making fun of people who drive trucks, please don't take offense to that. It totally makes sense that you could take a vehicle like this and turn it into something that, citizens and non-military people could use for their own needs. So, yeah.
Yeah. But some cool history, about the origins of the Mako. And in fact, the Grizzly was used in the First Contact War. So that's kind of cool. And I'm guessing that its deployment and use in the First Contact War probably helped the Alliance perfect it into the Mako that we would later find.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I mean, that's kind of the development of military vehicles. You use a certain vehicle in a certain situation, you figure out what its benefits are and its drawbacks are, and then you upgrade it and you come up with a better design.
Yeah, so strengths, I mean, it looks durable as hell. The technology, we don't know too much about the Grizzly's technology as opposed to the Makos, but some of the drawbacks, definitely not as agile, can't mobilize troops as quickly. I didn't see any thrusters, so there's a drawback. But, there's also a ton of other different civilian vehicles, not just the VT-7 that I mentioned, that were all kind of used and developed using the same basic chassis. So that narrow looking shark nose that we see on the Grizzly and the Mako, there's a reason why it's on other civilian vehicles in the different places in Mass Effect. And it was also diversified within the Alliance military itself. They liked the design so much, the art team anyway, that they made it into several different vehicles, according to another official post on the BioWare, now defunct BioWare forums. These different military uses and military versions of the same chassis included a recon drone controller, a mobile air defense platform, and the M38 military ambulance, which was nicknamed Moby because it's painted white
after the musician, the musician Moby, who is still famous at this point in the future.
It's actually what he's using to tour.
Is this his tour vehicle? He's still alive? Is it like a Futurama head in a vat kind of thing?
It's his tour Grizzly.
Okay.
And it's white.
Right. It's, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's kind of the lore that we know about the Mako, aside from those individual one-liners that people kind of throw out there and make fun of the Mako or defend the Mako in the series. But that's what we know about the Mako and its origin. You know, its predecessor, the M29 Grizzly.
Nice.
That's it. You know?
No, these episodes are cool because, with some of the episodes we do, we have a lot of content we can go over. We have a lot of different characters and the way they react to different situations and different parts of the story and all of that. But then sometimes we get these little pieces of the game that you interact with them, and there's still a certain amount of background lore around them, but there's these holes for like speculation and wondering more about it because the universe is so intriguing and interesting that you're like, okay, what would it actually be like to be in a Mako? How does that technology actually work? And so it spawns a lot of these kinds of different kinds of conversations, which are fun. So I've had a lot of fun with this episode.
Yeah, so next time someone's playing Mass Effect 1 and you're driving around, keep an eye out for the M29 Grizzly, and you can probably see it and think, there's a piece of history that N7 Legend taught me about. I don't know why you'd sound like an old man, but, you know.
Turn into Deckard Cain all of a sudden. Stay a while and listen. Yeah. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for tuning in again. Thanks for being here. Just another reminder, we're doing our patron chat next week, so you still have time to sign up if you'd like to join us. And if you are part of the Patreon, tier 4 or higher that are going to join us for the chat, we can start discussing what topics you'd like to talk about. So thanks for being here. Sam, you got anything else you want to share before we head out?
Yeah, maybe that topic that they can talk about is which one's better, the Mako, the Hammerhead, or the Nomad. Eventually, we will talk about the Hammerhead and the Nomad. I don't know when that's going to be because next week is the patron chat. Maybe the week after that, we'll talk about more vehicles, and then maybe we'll talk about characters who are related somehow.
Characters who are vehicles, vehicle characters. Wait,
characters who get us from point A to point B. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That sounds good.
That's the deal. But anyway, I am taking this weekend off of streaming. I'm going to see if I can stream some tomorrow, which if you're listening to this when it publishes on Spotify, will probably be too late. But just give me a follow on Twitch. You'll see the notification when I go live. I'm doing my personal canon playthrough. You can find me on Twitch and Twitter at N7 the Legend.
Awesome. And thanks for being here. Live chat. Thank you for being here. Twitch.tv/robotsradio for this show and the other podcasts that I do, and occasional streams when I get some time to just hang out with everybody. So follow us on there as well. And if you're looking for other shows, robotsradio.net has a bunch of stuff, my other shows, and a bunch of other hosts doing awesome content. So go check that out. And we'll be back next week. Until then, stay safe out there in that crazy universe. And if you're driving around to get Grizzly, I didn't really mean to make fun of you. I'm so sorry. Don't tailgate. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody. Thanks for tuning into the Mass Effect Lorecast. We'd love to hear your opinion and thoughts on the lore of Mass Effect. Reach out to us on Twitter at Mass Effect Cast, or check out the Robots Radio Discord. Also, you can send us an email at masseffectlorecast@gmail.com.